This time of year, and I don't know anybody that's ever actually eaten one of these. I guess it's been a while since I've seen them on display, like at a holiday party. And I know it's always kind of like the low-hanging fruit, pardon the pun, of, bad holiday gifts. But what exactly is fruitcake? I think fruitcake, if I'm not mistaken, it's just like I've never actually had one. I just see it. It's like this gelatinous, gooey configuration moshed together of, I think there's like cherries in there. Maybe some nuts, even though they're not fruits. I don't know why they're part of fruitcake. There might be some, not grapes. I don't know what else is in a fruitcake. I just know that when you look at a fruitcake, you can tell it's like all these different ingredients that are put together into one thing, and theoretically, there are people that like it or it's thought of as part of the holiday season. And today is literally when you are looking at the sports landscape, the calendar, the topics, the discussions, the things that are on our minds as sports fans in Indiana. It is literally like the good side of a fruitcake smorgasbord. I'm not saying that necessarily you want to eat it. But when you look at it, you're like, there's a little of everything in there. You got Indiana and Notre Dame in the college football playoff. You've got the Pacers that's literally like the walnut that's in there that you're like, ugh, how did I just, where did that come from? Because the season so far has been stale fruit. And we'll get to that. You got the Colts getting back into the swing of things. You got Indiana basketball taking on tonight Minnesota. You got Purdue basketball last night getting a win, really good win against Maryland. You had the way that the holiday weekend kicked off, or the weekend kicked off, I should say, with the holidays in mind, and it's not necessarily amongst the topic of everything else, but, Friday night I went to Taylor's Silent Night, and I talked about going to that game on Friday when we last talked. And I will let everybody know about that experience that took place on Friday night. But we'll begin with, I think, several storylines of the weekend. And that is it's funny because the matchup that we are most going to talk about, the matchup that is the most anticipated, the matchup that is the most highly coveted in terms of a ticket standpoint, and obviously in this market has a gabillion different conversations that can spawn off of it, is that of the predicament, the dilemma that now presents itself for the proverbial reversible jacket fan. And I'm talking about the stereotype that we mock of the Indiana fan that in football season is a Notre Dame fan. And I will defend reversible jacket guy and gal for this reason, even though I don't like Notre Dame. And people get mad at me because I'm open about the fact that I don't like Notre Dame. But Notre Dame's entire brand, Notre Dame's entire MO as a college football program is being the most polarizing program in the history of college football. That's what Notre Dame thrives on. You either are a fan of Notre Dame that loves them or you do not like them at all. There's nobody that Texas A&M. You ask people, you like Texas A&M? Like, they're okay. They're just there. But Notre Dame is one of those that you either love them or you hate them. You don't literally hate people, but you get what I'm saying, right? They are very polarizing. But I understand reversible jacket guy because, for example, myself, when I was a kid and I grew up in Indianapolis, Indiana, all I knew is that I was from Indiana. So before I even really understood about universities and different programs and, land grant schools versus liberal arts colleges and, all of the different things that go into universities themselves, what I knew when I was a young kid was that I lived in Indiana. And I had a hooded sweatshirt that said Indiana because that's the state that I lived in. And when we go on vacation somewhere and people would say, where are you from? I'd say, I'm from Indiana. And so I rooted for Indiana University because their jersey said Indiana. I knew I was from Indiana. I'm like, oh, those guys are from where I'm from. I'm talking about when I was like 8 years old, 7 years old, whatever. Now, when it just so happened that when I was a young kid, as a family, we went to Brown County one time, and my parents drove me through Bloomington, and it was during the fall because we were going to Brown County, and the football team, you could see football practice going on in the stadium down below. And so I kind of, I became a fan of Indiana football, and that was the Sam White year, even though I didn't know they were terrible. But it just so happens that for me, as an Indiana fan, that translated into being a fan of Indiana football as well. That is the rarity, I realize. To a lot of people growing up in this state, if you did not have collegiate ties to a university, you were a fan during basketball season of Indiana for the reasons I just laid out, and because they were nationally relevant and competitive. And then during football season, especially obviously if you were Catholic, but for a lot of those same people, Indiana's football program was not nationally relevant, so it didn't move the needle during football season to say that you were a fan of Indiana, but you knew that Notre Dame was in the state of Indiana. And I realize that to a lot of people, they think it's probably in Michigan, nationally speaking. But in Indiana, you're like, so I get it. I totally understand reversible jacket guy. But midway through this season, right when Indiana, probably around the 5 or 6 week mark, when Indiana all of a sudden is like, oh, wait a minute, like they're entering into unprecedented territory here of an undefeated season. My buddy Scott Wise texts me and goes, you mark my words, watch what's going to happen. Notre Dame's going to run the table, and Indiana is going to get themselves into the college football playoff, and they're going to have to play Notre Dame. This was like in early October. And I'm like, holy cow, here we are. So here we are. Indiana and Notre Dame. Indiana fans, many of which who would go down and tailgate for IU games because they went to school at IU and needed something to do to hang out in the parking lots of Memorial Stadium before going home and watching Notre Dame on primetime and putting their jacket on or reversing it. Indiana and Notre Dame in Indiana's best season in the history of that program, and now all of a sudden,
it's just common sense. Anybody knows you gotta keep your worlds apart. This is not good. Worlds are colliding.
The worlds are colliding, according to George Costanza, because you have the Indiana and Notre Dame worlds there, boom. And that's like the big storyline, and the joking thing for people is the worlds are colliding. Who are you going to root for? And I am kind of curious, and I think most people that are the reversible jacket Indiana basketball Notre Dame football fan probably deep down are kind of rooting for Indiana because this is uncharted territory for them. This is a feel-good, happy, fun story for Indiana. For Notre Dame, kudos to Notre Dame and Marcus Freeman, who I think is a really good coach. And kudos to Notre Dame for losing to Northern Illinois and proving that that was the anomaly. And saying, you know what, and I'll tell you what, Notre Dame is not just winning games. Notre Dame is really good. They're not really good. And listen, I am the first. If there is a reason to critique Notre Dame or their schedule or say that they are living off their laurels or they're overranked or they got a benefit of a doubt because they're Notre Dame, nobody would jump up and down and point that out more than I. Been a calling card of mine for like 20 years. But at the same time, when Notre Dame's really good, I look at it and go, you know what, they're really good. I think Notre Dame is outstanding. And I think one of the things about Notre Dame this year is once they lost to Northern Illinois, I think there were people that kind of wrote it off and just forgot about them, and because they don't get the bye. So because Notre Dame is not technically a full-fledged member of a conference, everyone knows this by now, I assume, but the agreement for Notre Dame to not join and undertake and fall victim to the peer pressure of joining the Big Ten years ago, and then again when that conversation came back up again, and I know that they play and they are partnered along with an ACC schedule, but they're not part of the ACC postseason, championship, etc. And so part of the agreement for Notre Dame, who doesn't need to join a conference because they're the biggest brand in college athletics, part of the agreement to allow them to continue that in that process is the fact that they agreed that in the college football playoff, once it went to the 12 team that we are in now, that they would sacrifice the ability to get themselves a first-round bye, as is the case for the conference winners, and then the highest non-conference winning ranked team that we see in Boise State. So Notre Dame, as a result, does not get into that bye. And so because of that and the fact that they'd lost that Northern Illinois game, and there was so much discussion about, okay, who's the ACC champion going to be? Who's the SEC champ going to be? Who's going to come out of the Big 12? What about Boise State? What about SMU? All of that was taking place, and I think people just kind of automatically forgot about Notre Dame and just didn't focus on Notre Dame. And so Notre Dame was just kind of going on about itself and winning games and winning convincingly. I mean, it's not like Notre Dame's schedule that you look at it and you say, yeah, I mean, they've rattled off, whatever it is, 10 in a row. Yeah, but who have they played? Well, I mean, listen. Louisville, when they played Louisville, was still right in the thick of things and very invested, right? And maybe that was closer than they anticipated. But since then, I mean, they've taken care of business, man. They come out, they jump out to big leads on people, and then their defense holds on or secures it like they did against USC. And I know USC's down, but that's a rivalry game. I think Marcus Freeman, in particular, defensively with this team, has them playing really well. But their offense has big-time playmakers. And it's a challenge. Now, Indiana on the other side, what am I going to say about Indiana that everybody doesn't already know? For Indiana, there is certainly the thought process of, look, IU's going to go in there and be happy to be there, and that's not how Curt Cignetti's going to roll with this. And I know that, I think it was Brad Nessler said at the end of the bucket game, Curt Cignetti's going to win a playoff game. You can mark my words on that. It's a tough one. And one of the things that's tough about it, the people that I grew up with that went to Indiana and are fans of Indiana, I'm on a group text with like 19 people, most of which go to every game in Bloomington. And everybody's saying the same thing. Let's go. All right, Indiana got Notre Dame as soon as it was announced. Let's go. And I don't mean let's go like a rallying cry. I mean like let's attend. Pack up the car. We'll stop. We don't even have to stop at the hip hugger anymore because now they got the bypass. It goes around Kokomo. It's faster. Let's go. We're all headed to South Bend. Everybody's all in. And then everybody's like, wait a minute. Indiana only gets 3,500 tickets, and that's a fact. Indiana is allotted for this game with Notre Dame 3,500 tickets. Tickets right now. Corbin Lingenfelter, by the way, is in for Eddie Garrison, who is actually today with Jimmy Cook, the two of them. And I thought this was fun. The two of them, because they knew that I was going to Milwaukee and bringing back Spotted Cow for Eddie and gifts that I always bring back when I do road trips. And this is nice. It's the holidays. Eddie called me last night to say that Jimmy called Eddie to see if he wanted to go with them down to Buc-ee's to get me some things from Buc-ee's down in Bowling Green and experience of that. So the two of them together are driving down to Buc-ee's today. Took the day off. I thought that was cool. So Corbin is in. Corbin, can you do me a favor and go on to, whether it be Ticketmaster or StubHub, go on one of the secondary ticket market sites, and I want you to put in the Indiana-Notre Dame college football playoff game, okay? Jake, we're 12 minutes in and you're still talking about this. I know it's because I don't want to talk about what happened last night with the Pacers just yet. We'll get to that, but we're not going to do it just yet. So I want you to tell me, Corbin, what the least expensive ticket is if you're going to buy, because you're going to go with one other person, right? So you got if you put in for two tickets, I want to know on the secondary market, because there's not going to be any primary, you're not going to be able to just go and buy tickets right now. So you're only going to be able to get into the game on the secondary market. Now, forget about the fact that there's a forecasted potential low of 8 degrees Friday night in South Bend, okay? By then, you are going to be so sticker shocked by what you paid for the tickets that the cold and the bite of that isn't even going to bother you. The least expensive ticket right now on the secondary market, and we won't say which site you're on, but I'm assuming Corbin's on one of the big ones. For a pair of tickets, Corbin, hit me with the least expensive ticket right now to get inside the stadium.
$1,035. $37 per ticket.
Okay. So that's probably going to go down, one would think. So $1,000. Let's say that dips down to $750. So if you want to go with a friend, you're looking at $1,500. Now, you haven't parked yet. J-Law pointed out that the parking is like $800 a spot or something ridiculous like that. And I get it. And I know that people are upset by that or people are offended by it, but here's the deal. And I think a lot of people got confused by this. A lot of people got confused by the fact that the opening round games of the college football playoff are designed to be a home game for the team that narrowly missed out on a bye. Now, Notre Dame would have gotten a bye probably if not for that agreement we talked about. But Notre Dame, this is a home game for them. Texas, it's a home game for them. Can you look up for me Texas-Clemson down in Austin? A little bit different because Clemson fans, I don't know how many are going to travel to Austin because they're elated to have won the ACC in the fashion that they did. I think Clemson fans are pretty realistic that this is not necessarily the year for them in the college football playoff, and they're pretty resigned to the fact of what's going to happen. And it's also not the 3-hour drive that it is for Indiana fans to go up and see their Hoosiers for the first time in the most unbelievable of circumstances. So apples and oranges all the way around. But the least expensive ticket if you want to get into Clemson, Texas is what, Corbin?
$319.
Okay. Now, let's go one more here. Penn State and SMU. Now, this one's going to be the best value of all, even though SMU is going to go in and beat Penn State. Penn State, their fans, many of which might have, I don't know how many were here for the Big Ten title game, but SMU fans SMU fans didn't travel to Charlotte for the ACC title game, let alone travel to Happy Valley. And SMU fans down in Dallas, they're living on oil money. They're used to the warm weather. They ain't going to Happy Valley and sitting out in 15-degree weather, even though I think SMU is offensively, once they get their offense going, they've got a lot of weapons on offense in space, and I think they can give Penn State some real fits and problems, to be honest. I think SMU is good. But I'm going to guess $155 is the go-in price. Corbin, hit me.
You're a little high, $150.
$150. All right. But again, SMU ain't traveling, right? Everything is worked into the factor for this to be the ticket. And I understand why Indiana fans would be turned off by the lunacy of only having 3,500 tickets. But this is designed to be a true home game for the team that is hosting in the non-bye round of the college football playoff. You win, and you go down and you take on Georgia, I believe, in the Sugar Bowl in New Orleans. So the ticket allotment is the same as if, for example, if the Colts, let's say they go in and they beat Denver. We're going to talk to Mike Chappell about that and the possibility of that coming up 1 o'clock today. If the Colts go in and they beat Denver, and Denver's schedule is not very favorable towards the home stretch here, and the Colts have a favorable schedule, let's say the Colts get into the playoffs, and they have to go on the road in the playoffs. They only get so many tickets allotted for, like, basically friends, family, and staff member of the Indianapolis Colts. It's a true road game, and if you want to turn the stadium that they're going to into Lucas Oil Stadium on the road, a la what the Bears and Bills and Lions fans did to Lucas Oil Stadium here, you got to go in the secondary ticket market, which is exactly what is the situation here, and it is a home game for Notre Dame. Indiana got in. It's unbelievable. It's the first time they played each other in 33 years. Notre Dame has obviously controlled the limited playoff history of the two. Yeah, I mean, like, sure, Notre Dame beat them in like 1809. Okay. Is that applicable now? Probably not. I think it's going to be a really good matchup, and we'll talk plenty about it over the course of the week, obviously. As a matter of fact, Tom Noie from the South Bend Tribune, who talked to us at the beginning of the year about Notre Dame, is going to join me coming up just about 10 minutes from now and kind of get the Notre Dame perspective on things, because I do think that they have, crazy as it sounds because it's the Fighting Irish, I do think that Notre Dame has kind of flown off radar for the last month or so, and people don't realize how good they may, in fact, be. And I think they're really good. But I think Indiana is too. But we got a big show lined up. Mike Chappell going to join us 1 o'clock. Don Fischer at 1:30. As we mentioned, Hoosiers in action tonight taking on Minnesota. I thought they were a little lackluster against Miami. I mean, it's a game that, sure, they won, and they won pretty convincingly, but at the same time, you got to – they just seem to kind of lack an energy about themselves. I don't know if that makes sense what I'm saying, but I think they're still trying to figure out where their bread and butter is. I think the bread and butter is in the interior and in Malik Renew specifically, and Balo as well. But if you're counting on, for example, a consistency from Mackenzie Mbako or outside shooting for Indiana, then I think you are setting yourself up for disappointment because it's just inconsistent, right? Purdue has a new head football coach, Barry Odom. Most recently at UNLV. And I don't know anything about UNLV football. I know Randall Cunningham played there. I know Ickey Woods played there. And I know that UNLV was kind of the last hurdle for Boise State in the college football playoff, and that was not considered to be any sort of like a gimme or a layup for Boise State. So I'm like, well, UNLV must be decent. The only thing I know about UNLV football is this. And how's this for insight expertise? I have a cousin that is born and raised in Las Vegas and a huge sports fan, and like 4 years ago, he became a season ticket holder of UNLV football, and the last couple of years, he's told me how fun their games are. But Barry Odom, I think, is a defensive-minded coach. That might help you win. I don't know about in the Big Ten right now. If you look at the teams that are really good in the Big Ten, what does Ohio State have in common with Oregon and have in common with Penn State, and for that matter, have in common with Indiana? Lots of points. Score lots of points. And I guess there's one of two ways to compete in the conference. One is you go out and you get yourself somebody that can score lots of points, and the other is you get a guy that brings a mentality and a culture that slows down those points. And Purdue thinks to me, it did also seem like it was somebody that they, and this is what I liked for Mike Babinski and Purdue's search. This appears as though it's somebody that they had honed in on and zeroed in on and went and got their guy, because it didn't feel like it was a long, drawn-out, lengthy process of multiple people and turn downs and whatever else. And he's a guy that has obviously a knowledge of running a program. But Steve Coffield with ESPN Las Vegas is going to join us in the 2 o'clock hour because he's done a lot with UNLV football and can give Purdue fans just kind of an idea of what it is that they are going to see now in terms of the guy that is leading them. And yes, we'll diagnose the Pacers as well. Pacers got a lot of mud on them, right? Coming into the year, it looked like the Pacers everything was good and glorious, and a piston's not firing. Something's wrong with the engine. It just doesn't look as pretty and as shiny as it did at the beginning of the year. And can that be turned around? We'll discuss exactly that. If those situations are present with your automobile, no worries. Jiffy Lube's there for you, especially if you have that mud on it and you're a member of a car wash monthly program. No big deal. You go into Jiffy Lube and you say, you know what? I'm a member of the monthly program here with my car because I like the way my car looks on the outside, but I want to make sure that it's running great under the hood. And Jiffy Lube says, we love it. We love your commitment to your automobile. That's why we're going to give you, because you're a monthly car wash program between now and the end of the year, so just a couple weeks left, $20 off a signature service oil change and a free tire rotation at any Central Indiana Jiffy Lube, which is your one-stop shop for all your vehicle maintenance needs, and you never need an appointment. Simply point out that sticker to a Jiffy Lube team member that you're a member of a monthly car wash program, and they will take it from there. Jiffy Lube, again, where you never need an appointment. Notre Dame in, now welcoming Indiana. The Irish. What is it that they do that's going to be formidable for Indiana, and what areas can Indiana exploit if they want to continue this Cinderella run? Tom Noie, South Bend Tribune, answers those questions next. Hey, Jake, I got a bunch of buddies that are going to the game with me from IU. I was able to buy them online for $585 a piece. Those are now selling for $1,800 a piece. Says, I think it's going to be 30% Hoosier fans that are going to be hearing that Notre Dame fight song in South Bend. They're probably only hoping to hear it one time, right at the beginning of the game. 30% seems a little aggressive, but we shall see. Joining us to talk about that and more, of course, he is with the South Bend Tribune. He is the beat writer from the basketball side of things. He is also a columnist talking sports and a return guest to this program on the Express Pro Tire and Auto Guest Line is where we find Tom Noie. Tom, you kind of had a feeling, did you not, that when I think a lot of people just thought, you know what, this is too spicy to pass, that they're going to pit Indiana against Notre Dame and put them up against one another. But let's begin with the Notre Dame side of things. When Northern Illinois beat them, we wondered what direction they would then turn. Obviously, that was the anomaly. What did Marcus Freeman do over the course of the year that allowed Notre Dame to just kind of get better week by week?
Continued to hammer home what the hell happened against Northern Illinois. He did it on a weekly basis, whether they were playing Louisville, whether they were playing Florida State, whether they were playing USC. When they would gather for team meetings sometime during the week, he would say, remember what happened against Northern Illinois when we had all the answers, when we were flying high after we went to Coffield and we beat Texas A&M, and then we just went lax the entire week of practice? Even Bo Collins said going into the USC game, he said, yeah, we kind of just screwed around that week of Northern Illinois, and look what happened. So Marcus Freeman was very clear as they moved forward, as it moved deeper into the season, winning 2 in a row, 4 in a row, 8 in a row. If you don't prepare like your lives depend on this, we're going to have another episode of Northern Illinois happen somewhere along the way. And they took that to heart and said, we're going to prepare like we've never prepared before for every single opponent, and what happened against NIU is never going to happen again.
Is it actually, Tom, in hindsight, strangely enough, maybe the best thing to happen to them because they've kind of gone off the national radar? In other words, there's been so much talk about Oregon and then all the discussion of, Alabama, Georgia, they're going to get in, whatever. And nobody's talking about Notre Dame here, who's just gone through and won 10 in a row. And it just doesn't feel like, even though Notre Dame always has a microscope. You get what I'm saying, though?
Absolutely, yeah. Unbelievably, it was the best thing that happened to them because not only did they lose early, it would allow them to build themselves back up and go win 10 straight, but go off the national radar. Like, there was so much hype about Riley Leonard's going to win the Heisman. This team's going to win the national championship. They're going to go undefeated. After just that one game at Kyle Field in late August, to where I don't know if Riley Leonard really knew how to handle any of that, and then they were able to bottom out against Northern Illinois, and they're just completely off the map. Like, nobody talked about Notre Dame. Even yesterday during the selection show, the only time Notre Dame was mentioned in the first 2 hours of the selection show was when the parent came up. Like, nobody's talking about Notre Dame, and I think outside of Oregon, Notre Dame may be the second best team in the country.
And I think that we think, Tom, Marcus Freeman just has this aura about him where the thought process always was going to be that Notre Dame was going to win defensively, but they've got playmakers and guys that can beat you in space, right? What would you say is actually their biggest strong suit at this point?
Their running game. Like, you can throw any of those 3 guys out there, Riley Leonard, Jadarian Price, Jeremiah Love, knock on wood that the knee injury he suffered at USC isn't as serious as some people might fear. But any of those 3 guys can just take the ball and go with it and get you 100 yards in a game. Like, we looked at Mike Denbrock and thought he was nuts when he insisted to us in August, look, this offense is not going to look the way it's supposed to look in August, in September, in maybe even early October. Not until late in the season when they're starting to roll over people and get chunk plays and chunk yards did we look back and say, yeah, you know what? Mike Denbrock knew what he was talking about, because as good as his defense is, it may be one of the best defenses in the country. This offense has really found another gear and another level during this 10-game win streak.
Tom Noie is our guest from the South Bend Tribune talking about Notre Dame and Indiana. All right, Tom, what percentage you think? Indiana fans inside South Bend, inside the stadium in Notre Dame, what do you think?
10, maybe 10%, because I know the ticket prices are steep. I know it's going to be cold. I know all this and all that. But Notre Dame fans, they have a long memory, almost as long of a memory as IU basketball fans. And the Notre Dame football fans know very well what it was like in 2001 against Nebraska, what it was like in 2017, whenever that was, against Georgia, what it was like last year against Ohio State. Like, they will work to keep the opponent's fans out of Notre Dame Stadium at all costs. Like, even if IU fans are asking Notre Dame fans, hey, we'll buy your tickets for $2,000 each. I think Notre Dame fans are smart enough to know what happens when they say, yeah, we're going to choose money over watching a football game. So I know IU fans are going to come up. They will get their hands on tickets. But I think Notre Dame fans will do whatever they can to keep the opponent's fans out of Notre Dame Stadium a week from Friday.
You know, the reality is, Tom, Indiana's, and I'm going to say this, and I hope people understand what I'm saying here. I'm saying this as a tip of the cap to Curt Cignetti in Indiana, okay? But Indiana, by heritage and by tradition and by brand, is still one that people look at and go, come on. I mean, it was a good story, but they went to Ohio State and they got rolled pretty bad. How much does Marcus Freeman have to preach to his roster, do you think, that this is, in fact, a legit team? Do you feel at its core that Notre Dame understands the task at hand with Indiana?
Yes, absolutely. Given, again, we'll go back to NIU, and given what this team has been through, they're on a mission to get to the national championship, maybe win a national championship. This is just the next step, and they're going to treat IU just as they treated every game on the schedule through this 10-week run. They're not going to look at IU and say, basketball school, nice story, but you know what? They've still lost more games than any school in FBS history. Like, they're going to say, if we don't bring our best, we're going home that night, and we're not ready to go home right now. So, yeah, Marcus Freeman has Notre Dame's absolute full attention in this one, and if anything comes after it.
Tom, here's the thing. I remember in 1988 when I was a freshman at North Central High School, we had to do NCAA tournament brackets. There's probably an illegality in this in your English class, right? But and I was convinced. I look at the bracket, and Indiana had just come off a huge win over Iowa, and they were the defending national champs. And I'm looking at it, and I'm going, well, if this team gets beat and that team gets beat, well, there's Indiana's on the Final Four. And I like imagined this. I imagined this perfect draw, right? And they get beat by Richmond. So when you look at this, your mind starts racing because you go, wait a minute. Whoever wins this game is going to get Georgia, who may not have their starting quarterback. And then the other side of that bracket, it feels like this is the side to be on, does it not? No disrespect to Boise State, Penn State, or SMU, but you've got Oregon, Ohio State, Texas, all on the other side. Is it dangerous to start looking past it, and will college kids inevitably do that?
I think absolutely they'll do that, and they'll try to find a way to knock that down like that, unless everything they've preached to us in the last 10 weeks has been false as far as shutting out the noise and not listening to anything that anybody had to say about that football team. Like, they've been really good at focus, and I don't know how that wanes or that strays or that doesn't even improve now that the time that they've worked all year to feel like let's get back and give ourselves a chance to chase this national championship. I don't think they're going to look at the bracket and say, you know what, we got this. We're going to beat IU. We're going to beat Georgia without Carson Beck. We're going to beat Penn State or whoever comes out of the other side of the bracket in Miami Gardens. And we're going to Atlanta, and we're going to play for a national championship. Like, I just think there's just something about this team, because when they lost to NIU, nobody expected them to get back into the CFP, because they had to do something that Marcus Freeman as a coach had never done, and that's not lose another game that everybody said, what in the world happened? They've been able to do that. There's been growth. There's been maturity. There's been a focus about this team it just strikes you as different and not going to fall into any of the shenanigans of we're going to go play in Atlanta.
Okay, Tom, we're going to get in our DeLorean, okay? We're going to go 88 miles an hour. We're going to get to 1.21 gigawatts. We're going to go back 15 years ago. We're going to stop random college football fans, and we're going to say in 2024 there's going to be a 12-team college football playoff, and guys are all going to be getting paid. And people are going to go, well, the second half of that's happening right now. We go, no, I know, but there's a 12-team playoff. So then we tell them the 12 teams that are in it. Indiana's the one that nobody believes, obviously, right? After that, which of these three is the
State's right there? Too.
What's that?
Arizona State.
That's what I was going to say. Is it Arizona State, SMU, or Boise State? Which of those three would people like 10, 15 years ago be like, what?
Arizona State, because they were picked last. They were picked to finish last in their league.
They're pretty good, though, right? Like, and they're kind of like Notre Dame in the fact that, like, did anybody really watch Arizona? I mean, people watch Notre Dame because it's Notre Dame.
Mm-hmm.
But Arizona State, I mean, I'm not going to lie to you. I've seen like 10 minutes of them, and it was the last 10 minutes of their game where they were up like 150 points on Iowa State. That's it, right?
That's 10 minutes more of Arizona State than what I've seen.
I'm telling you, Tom. Here's the thing. Not that you don't already wow people with your writing skills in South Bend, but if you want to write the column that's going to write it right now, SMU is going to beat Penn State. That's my upset of the playoff. SMU is going to go in and beat Penn State.
But is it an upset, really? Like Penn State, if there's any team in that top 8, or even when I say top 7, and say, I don't know about them, it's Penn State. It has to be.
Somebody sent me a text that was so brilliant, and it takes a second for your brain to process it. But somebody sent me a text after the Ohio State-Michigan game that said, Ryan Day is the Michael Jordan of James Franklin's. It's the most brilliant thing I've ever heard, right? It's true, though, because Penn State just feels like, yes, they get to this point, and then it's like, would it really be a surprise if Penn State forgets to show up at the party? But we'll see what happens. Tom, I know you'll have it all covered. I appreciate the time today on a busy day. And I think it's nice of you also to open up your home for 1,000 IU fans that are going to come up and be cold and didn't have tickets. So that's
there
cool.
You go. I'll put up a couple tents in the backyard for them.
That's right. Tom, I appreciate it as always, man.
You got it, brother.
All right, Tom Noie from the South Bend Tribune joining us on the Express Pro Tires and Auto Guest Line. We avoided it this long, almost 3/4 of an hour, but we got to talk about what happened last night at Gainbridge Fieldhouse and what's happening with the Pacers because it ain't pretty. And I still think that I had a gut instinct that was wrong. I still hope that I had a gut instinct that was wrong, but I worry about it. And I'll tell you what I'm talking about next. Last night at Gainbridge Fieldhouse, the Pacers and Charlotte Hornets, and that was a game that, you know, I've always said this about the NBA season. You need to, for each time a team wins a game that they're not supposed to win. So, like, if the Pacers go on the road and they win in Denver, and you get super excited, you're like, oh my gosh, that's a huge win for them. I've always said it only upholds as a great win so long as you don't have multiple losses that offset it. And you don't lose games that is somebody else's at Denver, if you will. And that means games when you are playing at home against a lowly team, and the Charlotte Hornets are exactly that. You got to take care of business. You got to get those games. Now, Charlotte's got a promising young star in Brandon Miller, who's really good. But something's going on with the Pacers, and I know that, and I don't know, you know, J&V had said this a couple of weeks ago when we were talking about it, and I think there's an element of truth to it and it was last week when he just said, sometimes I don't know if the Pacers know what's going on. And there's an element of that you think, yeah, you know. I'm going to present something that I hope is not the case. And I don't think it is the case, but at the same time, I don't think that you can rule it out. And I don't even mean this as something that's like on the forefront of players' minds, but maybe that it's back there. I don't know. You know, when it comes to NIL in college athletics, the Wake Forest football coach had a really interesting commentary this year where he kind of went off on NIL and was basically saying, look, everybody thinks it's so easy to just use NIL money and collectives to go out and get yourself players. But you have to protect against the fact that when you are going out and you're getting yourself a safety that's a transfer from Syracuse, I'm just throwing generic schools out there, and you're giving him $500,000 because you need a safety and he was an all-league performer. What about your 3-year player that's a junior that's been waiting his turn at senior at safety, who all of a sudden sees a guy just walk in, not only take a starting spot without really having to, quote-unquote, audition for it, but is getting $500,000 to do so? What does that do to your locker room? What does that do to your chemistry? And that's one of the pitfalls of NIL in college football, college basketball. There's an element of truth to that with pro sports. You know, Juan Soto is the big story right now because he got an unbelievable contract for 15 years with the New York Mets. Now, first off, I think it's absurd that anybody would sign a 15-year contract for a player because I guarantee you after like 8 of them, the Mets are going to be wanting to get out of that deal. But I digress. I remember when Alex Rodriguez got a huge deal with the Rangers, and I was covering the Cardinals at the time, and I remember Mark McGwire saying, I don't want to hear them talk in 10 years about how they can't build a roster around him. Because, and I think it was a 10-year deal that he signed, 8 or 10 years or something like that, because of the money they gave him. Tyrese Halliburton got a max contract. I think Tyrese Halliburton is a great player. I think Tyrese Halliburton was on an unbelievable, I mean, there was every reason why they had to give him that deal a year ago, and it was very celebrated. I don't think that Tyrese Halliburton is a bad guy. I don't think that Tyrese Halliburton is a selfish guy. And I don't think that the players dislike Tyrese Halliburton. To the contrary, I would say. But something does change when all of a sudden now everybody on the roster knows this guy's getting per year, take Pascal Siakam out of the equation, more than like the other 3 or 4 role players on the floor with him combined. And I don't think that hurt their chemistry. I don't think that created like any sort of a resentment. But something has happened in terms of just their energy level from last year to this. I think the most likely scenario is that Tyrese Halliburton is indeed dealing with a nagging injury. And when you factor in the fact that Nembhard has missed time and Neesmith, who's a glue guy, has been out and is still out, and you also have, say what you want about Miles Turner, but he's their only big. Because you don't have Isaiah Jackson. You don't have James Wiseman that was going to be your backup policy there. You're not getting rotation of steady bodies underneath. I mean, Enrique Freeman's a nice player, but come on. I mean, this early on. So there are things that come into play there, but I was very worried, as I am with any player, having nothing to do with Tyrese Halliburton. But whenever a young player gets a max deal and is a young player that did not come up through the ranks of being a straw mixing the drink level player at all levels that they played, Halliburton was a great player at Iowa State, but Iowa State's not a marquee program where he was a household name and everybody wanted a piece of him. Paul George was a great player at Fresno State, but Fresno State's not a marquee program where he was a straw mixing the drink and everybody wanted a piece of him. Victor Oladipo was a great player at Indiana, but in their college basketball preview issue, Cody Zeller was on the cover, and Yogi Ferrell was a beloved figure in the state of Indiana. And not everybody until late, the last probably year and a half that he was there, did everybody want a piece of Victor Oladipo. Those guys, again, when they got to the NBA and then stardom and money and spotlight fell on them, it was difficult for them to navigate through it and to handle everything that came with it. And I do think that Halliburton has been a little bit distracted by all of the glitz that comes with it. And I understand why they gave him that deal, and I would still do it. But if it's not the back, the only thing you can say about Halliburton at this point, because enough time has passed now where the slump has been there enough where you have to say to yourself, something is off. He's not hitting his threes. Defenses are not playing him the same way. Maybe that is because of first step due to injury. But is it also because of just a chronic fatigue from everything else? That's old guy yelling at clouds, I realize. I don't think it's that. But all I'm simply saying is I don't think that we have now enough body of evidence to be able to say emphatically that can be ruled out. And at some point, you've got to start asking yourself as well, because Larry Bird said it best. Larry Bird was the one that was like, look, you got to change coaches every 4 years because players start to tune it out. And Rick Carlisle is an outstanding coach, and I don't have any reason to believe that he is getting muted by players except for having nothing to do with or against Rick Carlisle. Maybe that is just sometimes what happens to players when you go through the rigors of it. Kenny, I'll get to you on the other side. Mike Chappell going to join us right after that as well as we transition into talking about the Colts getting back on the practice field. But there is another key aspect of the Pacers that we haven't touched on. And, Kenny, I'll get to that with you because I think I'm going to agree with you on another thing that I was worried about, and I'm hoping that I was wrong. And we'll get to that next. In February, I know we gave tickets away here. I've been going back and forth on whether or not. I think Sting. I mean, I really like Billy Joel, but I think Sting would be really cool to see, depending on how many songs he sings from The Police. We've been talking about the Pacers. Mike Chappell coming up just about 5 minutes from now, but in discussing what exactly is wrong. Look, Rick Carlisle said after the game, like with rebounding, for example, and I'm paraphrasing, basically said, yeah, other teams are out-rebounding us because they're working harder. They're playing harder. That's a defensive mentality as well. One of the big things to me that is fascinating about Indiana is the fact that last year they were setting the league on fire and on its ear because of the fact that their offense was so efficient. And you can't say – and people are like, well, they've changed the way that games are called. Well, it doesn't seem to be bothering other teams, because everybody else seems to have caught up to the pace that Indiana was playing, but the Pacers seem to be grinding it down, and the thing that made them so unique of that lightning in a bottle offense, flip a switch, boom, 15 points in 2 minutes type runs, has gone by the wayside. Kenny joins us on the program. Kenny, what's up?
Hey, Jake, how you doing?
I'm all right. Kenny, have you called the show before?
I have not.
You sound like a nice guy, Kenny. We do a little segment sometimes called Get to Know Your Listener. We've had a lot of success with this. Kids love it in particular. Can we play a little segment real quick before we get to your point?
Sure.
Kenny, if you don't mind me asking, how old a fella are you?
I am 60.
60-year-old Kenny? Okay. That's about pretty soon you got to be just Ken, right?
No, never.
All right, I like that. All right, so Kenny, if you are 60 years old, I'm going to guess that would put you in the graduating class of high school somewhere around 83 or so. Is that right?
83 it is.
Okay, and that would be from what school?
Ron Colley.
Ron Colley, okay. And you still consider yourself a rebel, or are you now more of a royal?
I'm a rebel forever.
Fair enough. All right, you had a thought on Pascal Siakam, if I'm not mistaken, right, Kenny?
I do, yes. So, the one thing I have not heard people talk about is the addition of Pascal last year. So, really, from the moment he joined the team, I think the chemistry, the running approach that they had has totally changed. Now, they adapted well, and he had great games, and, of course, they had a great run. But I haven't heard that since he's been part of the team that things have changed. Well, what are your thoughts?
Okay, and I appreciate the thought on that. I appreciate you listening to the program too, Kenny. Siakam is obviously a great player. I mean, there's no denying that Pascal Siakam is a great player. And I understand Indiana saying, look, if we were able to acquire a max contract type guy, you got to have a big two and even like a big three in today's NBA. And to have a guy that we were able to acquire that would be willing to even stick around and entertain the thought of being here and being part of that, we've got to jump on that opportunity. I understand all that. At the time, I was very vocal in the fact that nothing against Siakam, that I didn't feel like his style was necessarily a fit. Because, number one, his age and the timeline of, and I'm glad they gave him 4 years instead of 5, because I think that 1 year can be critical, but he is more of a half-court style player where his operating efficiency offensively is more in a slowed-down game as opposed to the pace and the fast pace that they want to go. He is absolutely I can get you a bucket when the shot clock's running down kind of guy. But what made Indiana unique a year ago is they never worried about when the shot clock was running down, because they were the ones running up and down, right? Not the shot clock. So I think, in fact, they are still learning how to work that in. And, yeah, I in terms of their style that made them unique, I still will go out there and say people that know better than I and are around it more closely than I, and I'm talking about those that are working in the front office, would have a better idea of how a guy meshes in. I don't think that there are personality conflicts there, but I think there's on-court non-coagulation so far that has taken place. And I realize they went to the Eastern Conference Finals with him. I mean, he was there for the latter part of the year last year. I get that. But it just feels to me like as he has become more of a focal point of their offense, that has meant a slowdown, and it was a fast pace that they were able to really build their identity with a year ago. Colts coming off the bye, a big one coming up against the Denver Broncos, who themselves were off this weekend. A guy that is never off. He is always active. Joins us now on the Express Pro Tire and Auto guest line from CBS4 and WXIN. I'm talking about Mike Chappell. And Chap, we'll begin with this. The bye week itself coming off of it. The guys, the one thing when you have a bye this late in the year, if you're really humming along, that would be a detriment because you kind of don't want to lose steam, but I don't think that's the case really with this group, obviously. The other would be if you're really banged up, this would be a good time for it. But oddly, the Colts are actually somewhat healthy. But your thoughts on what necessarily they needed to kind of get glued together in their time off would be what?
Yeah, they're sort of in the middle of that. They need to get Josh Downs back and probably need to get Ryan Kelly back. Shane Steichen talks today. I don't think he really advances either player's, status today. Maybe he does. They need to open up the 21-day window on Ryan Kelly's on IR with the knee issue. But no, and of the two, Josh Downs, not to diminish Ryan Kelly, but Josh Downs is the one they need back. He's almost irreplaceable on offense, so it really gave them a time to get a couple of these guys healthier, and they've got other guys. I mean, Alec Pierce has been dealing with an ankle. Michael Pittman's dealing with stuff. I'm sure the time off helps, but what he's dealing with, all that's really going to help that, I think, is 2 months of rest. I don't know that surgery is going to be needed in the off season, so. A late bye is odd, but it should benefit these guys moving forward over these last 4 games, which only mean everything.
Chap, I was talking about this with Corbin before we went on the air today, so I want your thoughts on it. Good or bad? So I'm not necessarily talking even, really. I mean, like I said, good or bad. Give me the 2 teams that you think, when you look right now in the NFL standings, have been the biggest surprises this year.
Good or bad?
Either way.
Jets.
Okay.
Bad. Good. Rams, maybe. I'm discounting the Buffaloes, but I put Buffalo in there. Gosh, they lost. They didn't lose, but they know where they're at. Stephon Diggs and Gabe Davis.
I think a lot of people thought Buffalo's window was starting to close last year, and it's like,
or at least they stepped back and sort of retool, but boy, they've been better. They've just been better, and if a player could have enhanced his MVP odds in a loss, Josh Allen might have done that. But those are the ones that jump out, the good and the bad. Everyone else, I can sort of rationalize.
Okay, let me give you 2.
Sure.
And one of them is kind of an afterthought here in Indy. I realize there's not a lot of connection to it. Minnesota would be one, right? I mean, did anybody think that Minnesota with Darnold?
No, you're right, especially after McCarthy goes down. Well,
exactly.
I guess we'll go to Sam Darnold. Well, Sam Darnold is probably top 5, top 6, maybe in MVP discussion.
Yeah, he's playing well.
Happened, but he's played well.
Okay, the other one for me, and you tell me if you – and I thought we thought this team would be better, but the other one's Denver. I didn't think Denver would be in this situation, and so the reason for my build-up there is, Denver's got to know that this is kind of a play-in game, is it not? Especially when you look at their remaining schedule.
Well, same with the Colts.
That's what I mean. Yeah, for both.
The schedules are different, but the playoffs start this week, and I think the Colts can get in winning 3 out of 4. I really do, but one of them has to be Denver. You just can't. You've got to get the tie break with them. And then there's every likelihood that Denver loses another game just because of their schedule. And if the Colts find a way to win against Denver, the one thing they can't do, obviously, is to stumble against teams that they will be better than. Tennessee, Jacksonville, the Giants. So it's still there for them. And I've not broke it down enough that if they lose this one, well, you can still lose, or you can still get in by winning out, and then, but Miami's schedule is easy, relatively easy. Denver's got a tough schedule. They could really bottom out. Even if they beat the Colts, they've got a tough road to go. So that's this is what you want to avoid at all costs every year. Is, well, if this team does this and this team does this and the Colts have a chance, well, this is where you are. But I think it's going to be a hill too high if they lose at Denver. I just think there's too many things that would have to happen. And then you're really letting Miami back in it, because I could see Miami winning out.
Well, they're in Houston this weekend, right? Miami?
Right.
And then after that, if you look at Miami.
But they're playing pretty well with Tua.
They are, and they've got the Niners. They're at Cleveland, and they're at the Jets. Now, the Niners, obviously that's not the matchup that you thought you're getting in October, right? So, yeah, and you're right. I mean, kudos, I guess, to Tua and to that group, because it would have been, Mike, easy for a lot of teams to pack it in, but the Colts would have the tiebreaker over them, right?
Correct. So it's really interesting, and it's crazy. Again, I think their odds, I know somebody posted, if they lose, it's like 10% to get in. But, I look at Denver's schedule, and there's every likelihood that they lose 2 games after the Colts game with what they've got. So find a way to win, and they're going to find out if this bye week helped the Colts, and again, getting Downs back. And really, maybe is Denver that good? And maybe they are. Maybe they are. Bo Nix is playing great. He really is, which, he was sort of handpicked by Sean Payton, and they're playing well. And you can't go to Denver, the Colts can't, and play half-ass and think you're going to get out of it. You're going to have to play a good game. Take care of the ball and run the ball and see what you get.
Chap, is it crazy of me to ask this? Would it behoove the Colts to go to Denver earlier than they would normally road games just because of the atmosphere? I mean, and when I say the atmosphere, I mean the altitude.
I guess you need to talk to Will Carroll and see if an extra day out there would matter. I don't know. I would think an extra day wouldn't do a heck of a lot.
Yeah,
now,
you probably need like 3 or 4, right? I mean,
that's what I mean. Yeah. They're not going to do that. I mean, teams are not going to do that. Obviously, some teams have, like, stayed on the West Coast, stayed on the East Coast, or even stayed in London. Yeah, I don't think one day would matter. And although I tell you, it's really kind of cool the way Denver, they remind teams all over the place that you're a mile above ground or sea level and all that, because they get signs everywhere.
Oh yeah, same. I mean, the University of Wyoming, their basketball court has the altitude written in huge letters on the middle of the court. I mean, all of it, right?
So you can't not miss it. And now I'm not saying it's all in your head, because it's not. They've done enough studies that it does matter. But again, that's not going to be the reason they lose or win, that they overcome that. But it's an advantage. It is, and that's part of your home court advantage is where you are and who you are. So I'm really curious how this team responds. They've, in my mind, they've not given you a ton of reason to trust them offensively or defensively, which is not a great place to be, in December. But it's what we said before is, with all the stuff that's gone on, quarterback changes and injuries and all that stuff, and 6 different offensive lines and all that, it's right there for them.
I know.
They can erase everything. They can erase everything by finishing with 5 wins. I mean, including last week or the last game. So that's all. That's I guess that's what you want is, failing being 11-1 or 11-2, whatever. At this point, you want to have it that, hey, if we go out there and take care of our business, we're in, and we don't need any help. Now, if you lose this week, then that changes and you need help. But at least you have it in your hands.
Chap, feel free to push back on this as much as you'd like or need to. But I was thinking about this last night. Mike Chappell is our guest on the Express Pro Tire and Auto Guest Line from CBS 4 and WXIN 59. We were just talking about Pascal Siakam and the Pacers. And I think Siakam's there's no disputing that he is a wonderful player, right? And yet, if you look at the Pacers in the way that they are most effective in the way that they want to play, I wonder sometimes if Siakam's style is the same, okay?
Because the ball stops when it gets to him?
Correct. And with that, with Anthony Richardson's emergence now and them using the running game of Anthony Richardson more, and by the running game I mean with Anthony Richardson running the ball, is Jonathan Taylor like Pascal Siakam? Is he a wonderful player and an indisputed talent, but a talent who doesn't necessarily conduce to what exactly the Colts want to do when they are at their highest operating level offensively?
No,
the way they want to play.
I'll push back on that because I think that when Richardson gets out there and gives you 10 carries for 60 yards or whatever and a touchdown or two, that enhances Jonathan Taylor. It really does. So I don't think it detracts from Taylor. It'll take away 2 or 3 carries for him. But no, this is what they want. This is what they think is their path forward is getting 60 yards from the quarterback and then getting 90, getting 120 and occasional 150 from the running back. So no, I think that what Richardson's doing helps Taylor. I really do. I don't think it too many scenarios that it hurts him. Now what it's going to do, you're going to throw for 180 yards a game, which I think it's hard. I think it's hard in the NFL to win consistently throwing the ball the way they are. I just do. And it's hard to have the best of both worlds, but I don't know how sustainable it is to have a passing game that's getting you 12 completions and 100 and gosh, what was it the other day, 109 yards or whatever it was. I don't know that that's sustainable, but I do think the way Richardson's strengths helps Taylor. I really believe that, and if they can get this offensive
well, but
line,
do Taylor's strengths help Richardson? And that sounds so dumb, I realize, but you get what I'm saying there because he doesn't. I feel like if you're going to run up the middle, in other words, like what wrinkles does Taylor bring that Richardson benefits from or can't do himself? And I'm almost embarrassed to bring it up that way.
Just the big playability, and if you take an extra defender away to pay attention to Richardson, maybe on the outside, and up the middle, maybe that middle linebacker's out of there, and so you'd have to really argue stronger for me to buy in that premise. But again, I would almost put it more on they've got to get this offensive line fixed, and you cannot continue to play, Danny Pinner for the first time and Mark Lewinsky for the first time and rookies and not you anticipate a regression. And I think we've seen that last week or last game a little better, but I'm more encouraged offensively with the run game, not the pass game, but I'm more encouraged by what I've seen the last couple of games with what these two guys do together. So I'm still sort of bullish on that if they can just get something more from the pass game.
And a lot of that has to do with tight end, does it not? I mean, and downs. I mean, look, Chap, to be fair, I guess, to everybody, I think, and you correct me if I'm wrong here, but I think that they are an offense with a whole nother level when Josh Downs is out there.
Yes, without question. I've always thought, Michael Pittman has been the guy that, we saw was it a couple of years ago when he was missing the Atlanta game and they could not function. Still the left tackle's most important, but the way these guys are built and what Josh Downs gives them, they've got no one else that can do that. Mitchell doesn't. That's not who Pierce is. The closest thing would be to move Pittman inside and let him work inside. But yeah, that's when you talk indispensable offensive players. If you take the quarterback out of the mix, boy, I go Bernie Ryman, and then it's pretty doggone close, and then Taylor. But then you get the Downs, and they just don't have a player that can even remotely fill what he does. Hopefully he's back this week. You never know with the shoulder injuries, and I don't know if Steichen will give us any heads up. But getting Downs back for the stretch run, it's just a different offense. It just is, and he would boost their chances by a bunch if he can come back and not just play and fill a role, but be effective. Because we've seen what happens when he's at near full strength and what his impact is with the offense.
Chap, lastly, tell me what we're looking for here this week. I mean, it's a big one going into Denver. So early in the week, just from the standpoint of, we kind of touched on the guys that you want to see back out there, make sure that the time off got them healthy. but their schedule, if you will, and as the Colts resume back into the order of things, is what for the week?
That we don't know yet. I assume they've been giving them Wednesdays off. I'm sort of semi-off this week for various reasons, but I think they go back to having a regular week of practice on Wednesday just because you just had the week off, for crying out loud. So I think it'll be back to a more of an active schedule, and then we'll see again. We'll know early in the week, I think, about Josh Downs and Ryan Kelly. I would think would hear something today, maybe tomorrow, if Ryan Kelly, the window on Ryan Kelly's open, because he's got to be designated to return before he can practice. Those would, in my mind, be the first two positive steps for the week to get those two guys back. And let's not forget, Braden Smith is dealing with personal issues and not knowing what that is. I mean, you hope this is something that he's is coming to grips with, and it's not. Sometimes when you hear personal reasons, your mind goes to bad places. Hopefully he's getting this under control and it's not too serious and he's back out there. But until he's back out there, you have a question at right tackle as well.
I thought Glowinski played well, and I thought Danny Pinter played well.
Yes.
But those do kind of feel like when you're on a hot streak at the roulette table, you don't want to keep going to the same number.
Well,
you know what I mean?
It's your donut analogy on your car. When you put the donut on a flat tire, it goes pretty good for about 50 miles, and then not so much. So when you're that far down the depth chart, it's not good, and you need starters back. They're starters for a reason. So hopefully, and I would think there's a good chance Bortolini's back, or at least moving through protocol because he had the extra week. So again, all that plays into the fact that the bye came in this instance in a good time for these guys. Wednesday will give us a better indication, I think, than today will.
Chap, you have no idea how much it means to me that you referenced one of my analogies.
I get things in my head that you put in there, and it just stays there. And that's not always good. It really isn't always good.
But the donut tire one, I believe the original person that I used the donut tire analogy for was Gardner Minshew, I think, where I said exactly that, right? And that is I throw a lot of analogies out. That's, I think, the only completion I've ever had.
But that donut wore pretty well.
It did. You're right.
You got them right to the brink of the exit ramp, and then they crash and burn. So
that's right. Then all the tires blew out. That's exactly right.
Right.
And I don't know if you know this or not, but right now the Raiders are actually at Express Pro Tire and Auto trying to get a new donut tire.
What a train wreck! What a train wreck there! What a surprise! Not really.
Chap, we appreciate the time as always. We'll talk to you soon. All right.
Thanks, guys. Be well.
All right, Mike Chappell joining us on the Express Pro Tire and Auto Guest Line. Yes, my donut tire analogy is simply that. There are players that it is great to get you to the next exit or so, but if you are ultimately trying to use that to get to your final destination, you're going to find out why it is the spare donut tire. Don Fischer has a lot to talk about because Indiana in action tonight taking on Minnesota, and the Hoosiers are on their way to Notre Dame for the college football playoff, and the voice of the Cream and Crimson is next.
schedule, not the same as it's been in the past. It is the same as far as they go out to practice, those kinds of things, but it's been scaled back to some degree. And the other aspect of it is, too, that the high school signing date was involved there with the coaches. Likewise, the portal now becomes the big story as far as for next year is concerned, and there's a lot of work to be done in that area as well. So Coach Cignetti is trying to get those kinds of things taken care of before they start for real for practice next week against Notre Dame. So, and they're definitely, they've looked at Notre Dame, and I'm sure they've looked the players have looked at film on the Fighting Irish, those kinds of things. But it's a little bit more laid back, at least from a player's perspective. But the coaches are just busy as they could possibly be in regard to all that needs to be done in regard to recruiting in the portal.
What area, Don, do you think Indiana has most improved over the course of the season?
Well, at least from my perspective, when I watched practice this spring, I thought there were some real question marks on the defensive side of the football. When I saw them in the fall, I thought they had improved to some degree. And I think there were changes that made during the season that helped this team become better as well on that side of the football. A couple of personnel changes, those kind of things. I just haven't seen any dramatic upgrade or negative in regard to this football team all season long. I think obviously the mistakes made in that contest against Ohio State, in which they fell, those two special teams mistakes were huge. And without question, that punt drop snap at the end of the first half that put the ball at the 7-yard line and gave Ohio State an easy touchdown to take the lead going into the locker room at halftime. I think that was a huge, huge problem for Indiana in the sense of mentally. And I don't think this team ever gets too high or too low, generally speaking. But I think that was a downer in that regard. And then they come back in the second half, have to punt after their first possession, and a guy runs it back for a 79-yard touchdown. And again, that was another special teams mistake because the punt went the wrong direction as compared to what the setup was to guard against that. So all I can tell you is I think the biggest upgrade through this season has been the defensive side of the football, and I think those guys have been terrific. They're one of the best teams in the country against the run, which Notre Dame is one of the best teams in the country at running it. So we're going to see strength on strength.
Now, Don, here's the thing, and I'm going to give like the old programming glimpse behind the curtain for people here. Indiana obviously in action tonight from the basketball side of things, kicking off Big Ten play with Minnesota. And then after that, we got a predicament here. Now, I have a very strong suspicion I know which way this goes. But Indiana in football in the college football playoff is playing Notre Dame, if I'm not mistaken, at the same time that the basketball team is tipping off against Nebraska in Lincoln, correct?
No.
What's that?
No, the football game is not. It's 2 weeks away here, or a little over just less than 2 weeks away.
I'm sorry, Chattanooga. So you would be able to do both, obviously, then.
Well, it'll be interesting because the football game starts at 8:00 at night. I know we won't be done until midnight or after with the football game itself, and the next morning we have to get up, somehow get back to Bloomington or back to Indianapolis, get to Bloomington and do a basketball game at 11 a.m. with our pregame show.
Well, so here's the thing, Don. It's a good, and I don't know why I was thinking that was this week, but it's obviously a good dilemma to have here, right? But for what it's worth, I am assuming that moving forward, understandably so, and I'm only saying this for the sake of listeners that would be listening, that you would, because of the rarity of the football aspect of it, if there's a conflict, you would go with the football side, correct?
That is correct, and I've done that my entire career here. I've never given up football for basketball games. I've never done that. So if there is a conflict, and if I can't get back, and if it appears to be too much for this old man, I will probably end up just doing the football game, but we'll see.
I'll tell you what, I mean, it like I said, it's amazing, right, that here we are in the holiday season, football and basketball overlapping. Let's get to basketball. Take it on Minnesota tonight. Gophers coming in 6-4. I thought Indiana against Miami and Sam Houston both. I mean, those are games that you're coming off of the disappointment in the Bahamas. I know they beat Providence. But it seems to me like Indiana is still trying to find its identity of what their most reliable offensive approach is going to be, because I know that they now have the ability to shoot from the outside, but their bread and butter really is, to me, probably goes through Renew and Ballo on the low post. You tell me if you disagree with that. But is Mike Woodson still trying to figure out exactly what their offensive rhythm is going to be?
I don't think there's any question about that. This team is not – I don't want to say they haven't gelled to some degree. I just think that they haven't – the pieces haven't all fit just yet. I think there is some consternation occasionally with whether they're going to run or they're going to try to push the ball inside to the bigs. I think there's still a lot to be worked out in that regard. I do think that Mike wants to play a faster game this year than they have in the past. I don't know that we've seen that at this juncture. Now, they did have a lot of fast break points against Miami the other day, and they've had it in a couple of other ball games. But right now, the biggest issue from my perspective is the turnovers that killed them in the Miami game. They got off to a great start because one of the things that I've been displeased with is some of these games they haven't had great energy or effort at the beginning of ball games, and then they fight their way back into a lead or whatever against a lesser team. They're already leading, but they let them back in. Kind of happened against Miami as well after they got that big lead at the outset of the ball game. So I still think there's lots of pieces that have to be fit together with the puzzle that this team is at this juncture. I think that they've got the talent to be really special, but right now it's still not quite there yet. They did have a great game the other night against Miami in the rebound department. I think they had 46 boards in that contest, which was really good. They shot the ball really well. The biggest problem in that game was turnovers. They gave up 20 points on turnovers in that ball game. They had 16 turnovers. So those kinds of things are still being worked out.
I also thought, Don, and again, I'm going back to when you're looking at Louisville and Gonzaga, which I realize they've played games since then, but you can learn from those kinds of losses. It looked to me like Indiana really struggled with transition defensively. If teams were playing a fast pace against them, it was like they were struggling to get back to try to stop that pace that those two teams played. Is that a fair assessment of one of the areas that they really need to work on before they get into the real thick of the Big Ten?
Well, no question. I mean, transition defense is critical, especially in Big Ten play, because there are teams in the league, they're going to try and get up and down the floor, i.e. Michigan State being, the primary one every year. They always try to get up and down the floor as fast as they can. And a lot of times you have to force them into a half-court game if you're going to have any success against them. So, but I do think that this team sometimes struggles with that transition defense to play. They don't have any problem getting down the floor when it comes to the offensive side of the basketball for the most part. The problems always occur, it seems like to me, when they're in transition positions defensively, and that's where it's got to improve. I don't think there's much doubt about that.
By the way, Don, I looked at the forecast and be glad that I was wrong, and it's not this Friday that you got to go to South Bend. I looked at that and I'm like, whoa, wait a minute.
You can't even here's the other thing. You might be able to predict the weather in Indianapolis and Bloomington every now and then, but you don't get it right in South Bend very often because that place up there depends on the lake effect and all those kinds of things. So you just never know.
We went to Milwaukee this weekend and it was 54 degrees yesterday and it was 15 on Saturday. I mean, what in the world is going on, right? So yeah, it's very temperamental, right?
Well, it's global warming. It's got to be.
That's right. That's exactly what it is. Well, hope for it for 3 hours when you're up there, I guess, right?
Yeah.
Dom, we appreciate it. I know it's a fun time. Again, Hoosiers and Minnesota getting underway in the Big Ten on the basketball side of things. We'll be listening, and then, of course, we'll talk to you again between now and when Indiana and Notre Dame get to the football field as well. But appreciate the time today.
Thanks, Jake. Appreciate it.
Don Fischer, the voice of the Hoosiers on the Express Pro Tire and Auto Guest Line. Yeah, you know it's going to be cold up there. And, again, I mean, the tickets right now for the football side, you're looking at, what did we say, Corbin, $1,000 to get in? Will that drop between now and in the next 10 days, 14 days? I don't know. I mean, 12 days, whatever it is. I don't know. I mean, 3,500 was the allotment for Indiana. 3,500 tickets. We'll see. Speaking of cool stories in sports in northern Indiana, I experienced one of them on Friday. And kind of had my eyes opened up a little bit of an epiphany and an awakening, if you will. Not an awakening, that's a little extreme. But I'll tell you what kind of changed my perspective on something next. play Notre Dame in the college football playoff that announced yesterday. You know, you've got Purdue has a new head football coach, and they went with a defensive-minded guy out of Vegas in UNLV. The Colts are getting set for what is really basically a playoff game against the Denver Broncos. So there's plenty to talk about. But I did want to mention and share about Silent Night at Taylor. What I knew was this. I knew that I had gone to Taylor basketball camp when I was a kid. And I knew that they had this tradition that started about 30 years ago where all of the students at Taylor are really quiet during the start of the game until the 10th point, and then they go absolutely crazy, and they storm the court, and they're dressed up in uniforms and costumes. And then at the end of the game, they sing Silent Night. That's what I knew. Tickets were really hard to come by. Thank you to Rick Johnston for helping out in helping me to buy tickets. And so myself, and I had mentioned that I met a guy named Travis at the Friendly up in Zionsville over the course of the summer. And Travis was telling me that he decided that he was going to do a new thing for the calendar year of 2024 of experiencing something new every week. So 52 new experiences for the year. And one of those that he wanted to do was Silent Night. And I said, yeah, I'll go. I'll go with you. So we exchanged numbers, and I managed to get the tickets, and we went up along with Matt Hiblin, who works here at WIBC. And we rode up, and we got up there, and we sit down, and there was a couple sitting next to us. It's general seating. It's a gym about the size of North Central's gym, probably. It's like a high school gym, seats 22,000, maybe 2,200. And we sit down, and I got to talking to the couple that was sitting next to us. They were, 10 years older than I. They had graduated from Taylor themselves. They have 3 children, all of which who have gone to Taylor. And so that gentleman, I think, kind of gave me a really good perspective about what it was really all about. And I sent a tweet showing the court storm, and then another tweet showing the students singing Silent Night. They begin singing the song Silent Night with 2 minutes remaining in the game while the game is being played. And the entire student body sings it all the way through, the song all the way through. It is really pretty moving, and especially during the holiday season. And in talking to the gentleman next to me and in witnessing all of it, I realized this, because I had somebody, when I sent the tweet, some guy that's a sportscaster in Ohio that does Division III athletics or something, sent me this thing saying this is a disgrace. It's a complete contrived joke as an attention grab to get on ESPN, and it's an insult to the students that are student athletes that are working hard and practicing, and now they go through this exhibition, and the other team also, I can bet they're livid about it. And then I witnessed it. And what I witnessed and what I realized is this. You know, Taylor is, and I've never been an overly religious or theological person, and it's certainly not my intention to preach that or talk about that on the radio, because I believe that people of all backgrounds, all creeds, all religions should be able to enjoy sports talk radio. But I realized that this place is different. And all of the students that were dressed up in costume, it was told to me, and I learned it by going up there and witnessing it, that you live basically in the dorms for all 4 years that you're a student at Taylor University. And so when you see an entire group of girls that were wearing Caitlin Clark jerseys, and then there was an entire group of guys that were dressed like Bam Bam from the Flintstones, and an entire group of guys that were dressed like mimes, which I thought was brilliant because it's Silent Night. And what the guy next to me was telling me was that each group that you see that are dressed in common, that is the dorm floor. Whether you're a freshman, sophomore, junior, senior, it's all student housing for the most part up there. And so everything at Taylor is about community. And so your community, you band together and come up with a uniform that shows that you are a part of that particular community. And they were playing Moody Bible Institute, which obviously itself is, I would assume, a Christian-based university like Taylor University is. And in college athletics, you see so often students that are there because they want to be a part of the competition of athletics, but also the opportunity to be able to play professionally and, play overseas, whatever it might be. When you have an NAIA school like Taylor and a school like Moody Bible Institute, you have guys that are playing basketball theoretically because they love to play basketball, but also because they know going into it that they are conduits for a message or a bond of a season. And I don't mean the basketball season. And so as I was watching that game and I was thinking going into it that what I was going to see was just a bunch of crazy college kids that were blowing off steam before finals and lived kind of in their own little bubble, and this was their version of going out to the bars at midnight. And I kind of walked into it almost smirking at the innocence and the naivete of that. But then I realized that the innocence and the naivete was my own. And I was naive as to what I was actually witnessing. And I felt bad for the guy in Ohio that thought that this was strictly about making exhibition of a sporting event, because it's not. It rather was using a sporting event to send the message that is a much bigger picture, and that is the belief for the students at that university and the culture of that school, whether you agree with it, buy into it, think it's hokey, whatever. The reality is they have principles that they believe in, and they have a faith that they are devoted to and towards, and the Silent Night game is their means and their way of saying what we are doing here is we are coming together to put this on as community, and the team is well aware of it. The opposition is well aware of it. They even make an announcement before the game about what happens at the 10th point, so everybody on the court knows what's about to happen when it happens. And then at the end of the game, when they start singing the song Silent Night, it's almost as if that's the message of, we realize that you witnessed the hijinks. We realize that you witnessed the caricature of this game. But that's not what this is about. This is about the fact that this is the season where we celebrate. We celebrate the season because of our faith and because of what we are going into, which is the higher purpose for us as a college and as a university and as a community, that our basketball players simply allow us, usually when they are the ones on the stage, they allow the stage to come to us to be able to deliver and showcase and celebrate our appreciation for a season that is different than just basketball and rather one of our faith. And to be able to witness that and see it, to me, I was very grateful for it. And everybody was wonderful. Everybody was friendly as could be. I mean, I was just a fan sitting up in the top level of the stands, but there was, in fact, an innocence to it that I appreciated because it showed my own naivete about what it really does mean in terms of the celebration of nativity, quite frankly. And I thought it was a wonderful night. And I would highly, highly, highly recommend for anybody, even if you are not of, and I totally understand, if that's not your bread and butter, your cup of tea in terms of what the university represents or what the college represents or whatever else, but just to see that common bond amongst everybody there and the pure joy in all of it, including, and I want to make very clear that everybody understands this, including the other team. They totally knew what they were signing up for, and at the end of the game, as soon as the game was over and the song was over, both teams then met in the middle of the floor to display their common faith. I thought it was very cool. And if anybody has the opportunity to go to Silent Night at Taylor University, I would 100% say you will enjoy it, and I hope for you that it allows for the same epiphany that I saw in realizing that the joke actually was on me. And I feel bad for example, the guy in Ohio that then blocked me, by the way, on Twitter because he said that I was lecturing him when I simply explained why I thought it was a neat deal. I thought it was cool. Purdue has a new football coach, and what's he bringing to West Lafayette from Vegas? We're going to find out from a guy that watched a lot of Rebel football next. By the way, I was wrong on this, Corbin. Corbin had to correct me. It took 2 hours today, Corbin. Eddie and Jimmy are off because they're Christmas shopping down at Buc-ee's. And you were a man of few words, Corbin, but you're the one that had to correct me. I'm like, all right, let's get ready to call Steve from ESPN Radio in Las Vegas about UNLV. And you're like, I believe it's 2:30. Isn't that what you said?
Yes, Jay. It is at 2:30.
The dulcet tones of Corbin Lingenfelter. 2:30, by the way, bottom of the hour, is when we will go out. I feel bad for Purdue because the reality is this, and I say this not as a knock, but kind of with a smirk or a tongue-in-cheek, but for Barry Odom, I guess this is like the best-case scenario, maybe, because you're coming into a situation where I'm not going to say there's not pressure on him or there's not expectation or spotlight on it. But, man, when you consider that you are announcing your coaching hire right as it's announced that Indiana and Notre Dame are getting ready to play each other in the college football playoff, then, I mean, they could have announced that they are hiring Bill Belichick, right? I mean, it was like it kind of gets buried, pardon the pun. But I do think that what you're going to end up with here, or what you're going to see, is a very defensive-minded coach. At least that appears to be the precedent. And is that going to win games? I mean, the Big Ten is a league that the teams that are right now at the top of it are ones that are playing at a fast pace. But we'll find out more about that bottom of the hour. I do want to know this from notably Indiana fans. Okay? 239-1070 is the telephone number. And I am curious, if you are an Indiana, like when I say Indiana fans, I'm talking about the fans that, and I think there's a lot of them, and as I mentioned at the top of the show, I don't damn people for this. I understand if you are a fan of both Indiana and Notre Dame, or if you are I grew up a diehard Indiana basketball fan, and I liked him in football because, like I said, when I was a kid, I got to go down and I saw them practice once, and I just knew they were Indiana, and I lived in Indiana, but they were not good at all. My buddy Andy Burt's grandfather was on the board of trustees, so they had season tickets. We went to games all the time, and I loved going down with Andy to go to the games, but they were terrible. So I do understand why there are people that their fall team, if you will, was Notre Dame. So if you are an Indiana basketball fan who found yourself also being a Notre Dame fan, I don't hate you for it. I get it. I understand it. But are you torn? Who are you rooting for? If you are one of those fans and you were like, oh my gosh, I'm a huge Notre Dame football fan, but it's cool that Indiana's doing well this year, so I've really gotten on board, or I go down and I tailgate for Indiana games, and I had no idea that they were going to be this good under Curt Cignetti, and what a fun story this has been, and let's roll with it. And then you're like, they're going to go to the playoffs. This is awesome. So too is Notre Dame. This is great. And I love it. Like IU plays the noon game, and I'm going to watch them play against Maryland. And then at 3:30, Notre Dame's on, and I watch both, and I'm a fan of both. I'm not damning people for that. I get it. But what I want to know is, are you torn? And who are you going to root for? And furthermore, I think Indiana fans are, upset's the wrong word, but shocked, surprised at the way that this worked out. Notre Dame had an agreement with the college football playoff and with the NCAA that they would, if they were not a major member, or an invested chartered member, not chartered, but a member of a conference in terms of the conference championship and the standings and everything else, that the price they would pay for that is that they could not have a first-round bye. And I think there was so much talk and discussion about Notre Dame not having a first-round bye and having, so that you knew Notre Dame had to play in the opening round. In addition to that, there was so much excitement and discussion about Indiana making it into the college football playoff, and even with the loss to Ohio State, staying in the mix and having just enough mayhem happening around them, and it turns out that Indiana wasn't even the last team in. I mean, that would be SMU, right? And so for Indiana to get that opportunity. Again, I think people forgot about or overlooked the fact that they were playing an opening round game, meaning that they were going to play in the round where there is a designated home team. These are not neutral site games. The opening round games by design, but we were so focused on the fact that Notre Dame was in that opening round game simply because they couldn't get the bye. In Indiana, we were so focused on they were in the opening round game because, holy cow, Indiana made it, that what Indiana fans, I think, forgot was that it is a true road game. And in a true road game, the ticket allocation is such that it favors, obviously, the home team, and Indiana was given 3,500 tickets. And people are like, that's ridiculous. They make the playoffs, they only get 3,500 tickets. Clemson has got to go to Austin and face Texas. Clemson's going to get 3,500 tickets, or whatever the same percentage is for the stadium for Texas. I don't, maybe it's $5,000, but Texas holds 100. I mean, I don't know. SMU's got to go to Penn State. SMU's going to beat Penn State, by the way. I'm telling you. I watched SMU. I mean, obviously I'm a Clemson fan, but I watched the SMU Clemson game. Once SMU's offense, and I haven't watched SMU this year, but once their offense got going, they're dangerous offensively. And it's funny because that game, and I simply pointed this out because I'm talking about how football's a game of inches. At the end of that game, and the fact that it's SMU and Clemson, take that out of the equation and just pretend that I'm talking about the Colts or I'm talking about Indiana or Notre Dame or whoever. At the end of that game, SMU is absolutely roaring back, and yes, I'm a believer in momentum. I know that not everybody is. I'm a believer in momentum. You can tell when a game swings and you're like, this team literally is backpedaling with one foot on a banana peel and the other in the grave. And that's what Clemson felt like against SMU. SMU was down 31-17, and they come back, and they're scoring, and they're getting stops, and they're scoring, and you're like, oh, boy. If this game's 5 minutes longer, Clemson's going to lose this game. So SMU scores with 16 seconds left in the game to tie the game. And and everybody in that building knows, if this goes into overtime, SMU's going to win this game. And this is the funny thing about football and how it's a game of inches and you never know what's going to happen. Clemson puts a receiver back that was a big-time recruit that kind of got buried in their depth chart, and they put him back for to return a kick for the first time. And he gets the kick return, and he breaks it open, and he returns it like 38 yards. And you're like, oh. Like, he just returned this thing now to the point where I think there was 8 or 9 seconds left. And he gets stopped at like the 45 or something. And it's like, they got time to make a pass play here and try to get themselves in position for a field goal. So they run a pass play. They have a timeout left. They run a pass play. They execute it perfectly down to like the 36-yard line. I don't know what it was, the 41. It was 41. Boom, they call a timeout with 2 seconds left. And they kick a 56-yard field goal to win. The only reason I bring all this up, not because it's Clemson, not because it's LSU, but because football's a game of inches. And in that moment, what I think you lose sight of, as did I, that kick return, if he goes 5 more yards and chews up 3 more seconds, they only have time for one play. But he got stopped at the absolute perfect time because it left enough time on the clock for a pass play and then the field goal. That's how narrow things are in the game of football. But now Clemson goes to Texas and SMU goes to Penn State. And I watched SMU's offense, and I know Penn State defensively, and Tom Allen with that group, Penn State's really good, and you can't take Oregon with that as a critique of that because Oregon offensively is very elite. But I'm telling you, SMU is very slippery offensively, and they can give Penn State some problems. But I'm curious, Indiana fans, are you torn? And if you are an Indiana fan that is a diehard Notre Dame fan, which one are you rooting for? Because you can say to yourself, I like both, and I just want to see a good game, and then I'll root for whichever one advances. You can say that, but deep down, you're going to find yourself getting nervous and or rooting for one versus the other. The one guy I know that's going to be rooting for Indiana because he's been absolutely convinced that Indiana's will be going to a Rose Bowl for 55 straight years is Turnbuckle Bill. TB, what's up?
Hey, man, I'm just happy. I'm as happy as can be. I'm thrilled that we're going to get a chance to go up and play in South Bend at Notre Dame, because that means that the IU Hoosiers will be victorious on the two most iconic college football fields in the country this year, the Rose Bowl and then Notre Dame Stadium.
That's a good point, man. That's a good point. And listen, Bill, I think you'll agree with me. I know that you love IU football, and I'm happy for you, Bill, because we've known each other a long time, and you are one of those guys that has never stopped believing in IU football, even when they're like 0-9. You're like, well, this is the week they're going to win. I mean, you've always had that belief and optimism about it, but at the same time, I think also you're objective enough to know it's a big challenge because Notre Dame is pretty darn good.
It's going to be huge. The first, I'm really interested after the coin flip to see what happens, who receives the kick, because I think IU will march right down the field on Notre Dame. I don't think Notre Dame is that good, but they've got all the mystique there. They got the folklore. But is that game going to be at night? It's a night game.
7:00 game. Yeah, 7:00 a week from Friday.
So I'm just as happy as can be that the entire country is going to get a chance to see the big red machine from Bloomington go up to South Bend.
Bill, whoever would have guessed, Bill, if you go back, you get in your DeLorean 1.21 gigawatts, you go back 15 years, whoever would have guessed that the first ever college football playoff game in the expansion to 12 teams would feature two teams, not one, but two teams from the state of Indiana. And if I'd have told you that 15 years ago, there's no way that people would have said Indiana and Notre Dame. They'd have said for sure, probably Purdue and Notre Dame, right? Would be the two teams that you would have picked. Hell, if Brady Hoke was there, maybe people would have even said Ball State. I'm kidding there. But I'm telling you, it's cool. It's very cool. But I think Notre Dame and Marcus Freeman are a huge challenge. A huge challenge. Now, the other side of it is, in the world of sports last night, the other story is that of the Pacers. And I've held off, and now it's to the point where I'm like, okay, my concern level is very high. And I don't know what it is. I wish I could sit here and tell you folks that I know what the answer is for the Pacers or what went wrong last night. I don't know if it's, but I think it's one of these things. Maybe it's a combination of all. Last year, maybe it's as simple as this. Maybe last year was an anomaly because nobody knew or expected that the Pacers were going to be there, and so they were not taken seriously, and now they're on the radar, and people had them circled. That seems pretty elementary, but I don't think you can rule it out. I don't know if it's that Tyrese Halliburton was a player that was upset when he got traded from Sacramento, and then he realized that he was with the team that wanted him here, and he had a unique skill set, but it was kind of buried in Sacramento because of the different players on the roster. So he got a chance here to really blossom and flourish. And once that happened, number one, he got paid a tremendous amount, and it's hard to back that up because then you have all of a sudden reality shows and, social responsibilities and interviews that are requested of you and media responsibilities and everything else and all that comes with it. And not only does that become exhausting, but at the same time, defenses start figuring you out and paying more attention to you in the scouting report and figuring out ways to break you down. And you weren't used to that before. And unlike other players in the NBA that are elite players, Kevin Durant, LeBron James, for that matter, Anthony Edwards, Karl Anthony Towns, whoever you want to pick. Not all, but a lot of stars in the league have been stars since they were 15 years old. In every AAU tournament they were in every NCAA tournament game they were in every recruiting battle they were involved in every NIL offer that came their way even before NIL was around. Wink, wink. They became accustomed to the expectation and the pressures that come with that microscope, and Tyrese Halliburton was not. And he hasn't handled it well, and that's set him back this year. I don't think that's what's going on, but I don't think you can rule it out. It's possible that Pascal Siakam was a really talented player in Toronto that was a huge part of a championship team, and then it got to the point where the Raptors decided contractually that they wanted to go in a different direction and not invest a lot of money in him, and so the Pacers picked up a phone and found out that he was open to be traded here, and so they traded for him because there was an agreement with the agent that he would want to stay in Indiana and play here long term, and so the Pacers got intoxicated by the possibilities of having not one but two quote-unquote franchise, quote-unquote max contract guys on their roster, because we know that you've got to be a two-headed monster, if not three, if you want to win in today's NBA, that you got Tatum and Brown in Boston, that you've got, Brunson and now Karl Anthony Towns in New York, you've got Giannis and Lillard in Milwaukee. Whatever team you're looking at, it takes two to win, right? If not three. And maybe Indiana said to themselves, you know what? We have an opportunity here to get that second, and it's a guy that actually would want to stay here and play here, and we've got to grab onto somebody like that when we can, because we're up against it as a cold weather middle market city. And if this guy actually is interested in being here, we got to lock in, and we'll figure out how it gels later. And then they realized that Pascal Siakam, as wonderful a player as he is, and as good a player as he is, that Pascal Siakam's strength is playing a style that is not conducive to the style that made Indiana unique, different, and caught the league by its ear a year ago. And that instead of running and playing fast pace, they were slowing it down, and they're getting it into half court, and Matherin's the same way. And he was hurt last year, and so we didn't know what that was going to be like. And now Mathurin and Siakam are playing a little bit slower, whereas the rest of the team is wanting to play a little bit faster and get going in transition because that's what they're used to. And maybe that lack of cohesiveness is holding them back right now. I don't think that's what it is, but I don't think you can rule it out. And then you think about when Larry Bird was running the Pacers, and when Larry Bird was coaching the Pacers, and when Larry Bird coached the Pacers and took them to the NBA Finals, and who was his assistant, Rick Carlisle, and Larry Bird decided that he didn't want to coach beyond that. And he was asked at the time, why wouldn't you want to coach even further and try to win a championship? And he said, I just think players tune coaches out after a while. And then when Larry Bird was the president of basketball operations for the Pacers, and they would make a coaching change, and he was asked about it, Frank Vogel coming to mind, and the answer was, look, I think Frank's a wonderful coach, and I think guys like him, and he does a really good job, but I just think players after a while tune guys out, and you got to make a change. You got to keep it fresh. 4 years is the max. I'm paraphrasing. I think that's what it was. And now maybe Rick Carlisle has fallen victim to that. Maybe Rick Carlisle has come in, and because he's a demanding coach, and in particular a coach that a year ago I think wanted to see them start playing with more effort defensively and is very vocal about wanting to see their efforts in rebounding and defense be where he wants it to be for this particular group, and maybe that message is starting to fall on deafer ears. I honestly don't think that's the case, but I don't think you can rule it out, because something is awry here. And then there's the most logical answer, which is they're simply not healthy. James Wiseman was a guy that by no means did anybody think was going to be an integral part of the team this year, but when Isaiah Jackson gets hurt, and Wiseman got hurt on the first quarter of his time here, now you're down two guys. Miles Turner, then, as a result, is kind of your lone big, and he's going out there, and the minutes that he's having to log and the responsibilities he's got to have because you don't have depth at the big. And Aaron Nesmith is an important kind of glue piece for them. Not there. Very good defender for them. Swiss Army offensively, can play a couple of different places. Hit shots when you don't even necessarily have to orchestrate through them for him to get points for you. Not on the floor. Andrew Nembhard, very important piece. If he's playing well, can give breathers to Halliburton if Halliburton is dealing with any sort of attrition, fatigue, or injury. But Nembhard not there for a lot of it, hurt. Maybe injuries are strictly what is holding them back. And that leads us back to Halliburton. Because at some point, the most plausible, the most logical, and the most easily accepted and easiest to swallow explanation for Tyrese Halliburton's dip in production is the fact that he would be injured. If you would say he's got a back injury, his back is bothering him, and as a result of that, he can't get quick first step. And because he can't get quick first step, teams are laying off of him and challenging him to shoot the three, and his shot's not going. And the only reason last year that his shot was going is because teams were coming up on him to respect that shot. He would take the first step and either go right around somebody, or if they were denying that, they were playing that much further off of. Now they're just challenging him to shoot. And for whatever reason, his shots aren't falling, and that would lead you to believe that that's also why he's not getting the first step, because when he comes out, the first step he takes is over to the heating pad to put it on his back, because Tyrese Halliburton, is not 100%. I do think that's the most plausible explanation. But then the question becomes, if that's the case, and if you are losing home games to Charlotte, then why are you not resting him and getting him healthy? He's coming off of the internet, and I know he didn't play a lot in the Olympics, but still, I mean, he's coming off of this whirlwind, right? And then in addition to that, the last year being the focal point of everything, including All-Star Weekend and being a host and doing all of those things. And I know that people are going to point that out. Well, what's he doing out at a club at 3 o'clock in the morning in the offseason? I mean, it is the offseason, and he's in his early 20s. I mean, but still, if it is in fact a health issue with Tyrese Halliburton, then at what point do you say, we're just going to go ahead and admit that and give him the time to get healthy, because by having him out there, it's not helping anybody. His outside shot is not there. I mean, but then he has the occasional game where you're like, okay, the old Halliburton is back. And I have not personally dealt with like any sort of a chronic back injury, but I do think, and it does feel to me like it's one of those injuries that you kind of from one day to the next don't know when it's going to flare up and when it's going to debilitate you. So the most plausible thing would be that Halliburton has the back injury, because that would explain why some games he goes out and looks and probably feels like the wind, and then other games he goes and looks like he's running into a 100-mile-an-hour headwind. I don't know which it is. But it seems to me like he's hurt, and if he is, then probably the time has come now to give him that time to rest it. But losing to the Hornets and then having Rick Carlisle say afterwards that it was an effort issue with rebounding, guys are just working harder than we are to rebound. I mean, this is a group that's been together long enough, that's played enough games together, that's had success together, that they know better, and something's got to change. Something does, whether it's the attitude, whether it's the cohesiveness, whether it's the lineups, but then that becomes a challenge because they're strictly not healthy. But to win, you got to defend in the NBA. Now, does a good defense automatically help you win in college football in the Big Ten? Purdue's hoping so, because they brought in a guy now from UNLV that's how he's won with the Rebels. But what more is Purdue getting in Barry Odom? We'll find out from somebody who knows him next. You know, one of the things that I've always heard about Vegas, and I'll be curious, our next guest who joins us on the Express Pro Tire and Auto Guest Line, he is with ESPN Radio in Las Vegas, Steve Coffield, who talks running Rebels, football, basketball, all of it, but notably can give us shed some light on Barry Odom, Purdue's new head football coach. Steve, I'm going to begin with this. If you live in Vegas, how often do you actually go to the Strip?
I think the answer for most people is maybe twice a month, but for me, UNLV is kind of near the Strip, and I actually do a lot of live shows up and down the Strip, so I'm down there a lot more often than the average Las Vegan.
I mean, I was going to say, like, anytime, though, friends from out of town come to visit, you're obligated, right?
Yeah, but you know what? I've actually coaxed most of my friends, unless it's their first time. If they've been here a bunch of times, I'm like, hey, how about we go to my local spots? I got some cheap spots and hot spots. So I try to get them off the Strip. Because otherwise you get the prices you get killed on. They charge for parking now, which is one of the most absurd things ever. I mean, the Strip is cool. Once you've seen it a couple of times, unless you're a gambler or a showgoer, then you can kind of do the same stuff off the Strip. There's other hot, cool areas around Las Vegas that are a little cheaper.
I mean, and there's, obviously now, Henderson, all of it. I mean, it's a very cool area, no question. Hey, I appreciate your time. Let's get right to it on Barry Odom itself. First off, we'll just talk scheme. Assuming that he's able to bring the same brand of football with him to West Lafayette that he had with UNLV, what sort of team are Purdue fans going to start seeing once he gets it going?
Well, I can answer on defense because I think Michael Scheer, his DC, his protege, from his days back at Missouri would be the defensive coordinator. So, they came in touting a 3-3-5, so really heavy on the defensive backfield. And last year they couldn't really play it the way they wanted to, so they went a little more traditional. But this year they had the players to do it, so they went more 3-3-5. They played traditional defense as well, but it's heavy on blitz. It's heavy on eye candy, trying to fool the opposition. This year they were really good against the run. They weren't great in their last game against Genti, but really no one was. So pretty good run stopping. I would say the only weakness they had, and I think a lot of it was because personnel, and they got better this year, was protecting against the deep shot. So they gave up a lot of deep shots year one. They improved a bunch this year. So attacking defense is pretty good against the run, I would say. And then on the offensive side, I have no idea because he's had good offensive coordinators over the years, but I don't know that Brennan Marion is going to be following him. I don't know yet if Brennan Marion's getting an interview with UNLV. I do know that there's going to be offers out there, at big Power 4 level money that Brennan Marion could probably go somewhere for between 1.3 and 1.5 million. So I don't know what the coach's pool is at Purdue. Maybe they get him, maybe they don't.
Steve Coffield is our guest from ESPN Las Vegas, who has covered UNLV football, and of course Barry Odom, the head football coach of the Rebels last season, now on his way to Purdue to become the head man for the Boilermakers. When you look at Barry Odom in this process, Steve, was there discussion? I mean, in other words, it seems to me like once Mike Babinski and the Purdue staff had made their mind up that Ryan Walters was not going to be there next year, in years past you see coaching searches where you can kind of tell that you're getting like choice number 8 type thing. This looks like Purdue honed in on him pretty immediately and that this thing came together fairly quick. How did it appear on your side of things?
Well, for us in Vegas, I don't think we had much of a whiff that any discussions with Purdue were going on. Now, I think after the first year when he killed it, people went into, even last offseason, thinking, hey, is he a one and done? They definitely went into this season thinking, hey, he may be gone after 2. But I think with the opening list, no one got real worried. And this is not a knock on Purdue. I just think people in Las Vegas don't know about Purdue, don't realize the might of even the no insult to anyone, but the bottom of the Big Ten.
Sure,
that was going to be a viable option.
Well, they are, or else they wouldn't be looking for a coach, right? You know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, simply because of the money that the Big Ten can offer. So I don't know do you guys have a number yet on what he got a year?
I have not heard. I mean, I've heard the anticipation or the expectation of Ryan Walters. The buyout was 9, and I'd heard that they were expecting like 4 to 5. I mean, does that sound like what would be in the ballpark?
I'm sure it would. I think UNLV probably could have gotten to, because they were working on a contract for a while now, an extension with a boost. I think UNLV probably could have gotten to upper 2s, maybe even 3. So I would think this has to be a significant bump up. But to answer your original question, I think a lot of people are surprised that Purdue was the spot. They actually were fearing West Virginia. I had heard that even before Scott Frost that Central Florida was a real option, and that just didn't work out between Odom and UCF. So I would say the thing is the timing of it is kind of crazy because yesterday we had a press conference, a dual press conference with the announcement of the Las Vegas Bowl teams that are going to be participating, and then the announcement of where UNLV was going to a bowl game. And all of a sudden you're like, okay, well, Barry Odom's gone. And then even this morning, seeing Barry Odom speak to the team, you're like, I think everyone here is still a little bit in shock that it happened that quickly. Not that he's leaving, but that it happened that quickly.
You know, the Vegas is funny to me, and I realize, Steve, like you would probably call them the Rebels or UNLV, whatever. I've always just said Vegas for UNLV, but UNLV still, at least outside of your area, I think nationally speaking, is thought of as a basketball school, not unlike Indiana and to some extent Purdue. But the football side of it, I mean, they've had good players there, but I'm curious in terms of just the overall spotlight, the intensity that comes with being the head coach at UNLV. Not that Purdue is Notre Dame, but it is in the Big Ten. There's a lot more, that is a pretty loyal fan base. What sort of things would he have had to contend with at UNLV in terms of pressures, expectations?
No pressures. I mean, expectations now were raised because he had a 9-win season and potentially could have had an 11-win season. So, to me, what he did the first couple of years here, he had a job for at least 10 more years. He'd have to pull an absolute El Flapo for years and years to go bye-bye. So he so exceeded expectations. And their history has been, 30 or 40 years of trying to scrape to 4 or 5 wins and make a bowl game. So what he did was beyond belief. And there's media coverage. It's not a whole lot of media coverage. I mean, right now, people, a lot of the fans are apoplectic. They're very angry, but they have to understand. And I think a lot of them know the situation. Once they calm down, they'll realize Odom had to take an offer like this. But yeah, I think it's become a better job because one, they built a real football facility after having kind of a dump on campus for a while. And it's nice, they to the tune of like 35 or 40 million for a group of 5. That's a good facility. They play in Allegiant Stadium. They got to fill it some more, but that's a nice stadium to recruit to. So he exceeded expectations. Now he's set a bar where I think the program can at least hope for bowl games, and they should have a pretty good pool for money to hire a new coach.
Curt Cignetti at Indiana maybe even escalated for Purdue the necessity to make that change because all of a sudden Indiana, their rival, is right there and they're in the college football playoff. Steve Coffield, by the way, our guest from Las Vegas. Cignetti is a guy that wasn't afraid to come in and immediately say stuff that was borderline cocky, kind of a fun personality. What kind of guy, personally speaking, and I'm not pretending, Steve, that this means that you were going out on the strip with him on a regular basis, but just the personality in general and of Barry Odom, we're expecting what?
Yeah, I don't think he has a confidence like Cignetti. He's not going to be as brash as Cignetti, but he absolutely has expectations to win. When he came to UNLV was off a 5-7 season and probably should have made a bowl game the year before. And I think he looked around. He's like, okay, I got a pretty good core here of about 18 to 20 players I'm going to carry over. I'll tell you where he is like Cignetti. He has no fear of going into sort of the unknown in terms of the roster. They will nothing against the Purdue players, but they will examine who they are and what their upside is, and he will turn over the roster because the first 2 years with UNLV, he turned over to the tune of like 45 to 50 players each year. Like even the first class that came in, half of those transfers, I think, listen, guys, this whole narrative that the kids are the evil ones in the transfer portal, coaches tell kids to go. They tell them, sorry, you're going to have to move on. You better find someone else to play. So he doesn't have any fear of that. I'll tell you the biggest positive coming in is that he's learned to embrace the transfer portal. Barry Odom's an interesting guy because he's an old school linebacker. He's an old school coach. No insult to him, but he probably looks like he's late 50s. He's actually only 48 years old. But he told a story once about his wife telling him about 4 years ago because he was pissing and moaning about the transfer portal. His wife was like, hey, this is not going to work unless you open up to this thing. And man, he opened up to it and he mined the transfer portal brilliantly. And the other thing, you're getting a guy who's if you dig a little deeper, he's a very funny guy, very nice guy, very sarcastic guy, but he'll be good with the media, but he'll have that shell up at first, kind of straightforward. But I think it's a brilliant hire. I think they nailed it at Purdue.
Native of Oklahoma and has coached predominantly in the Midwest, actually. Missouri, Memphis amongst his stops, Arkansas as well, UNLV, and now at Purdue. Steve, lastly, I got to know, how many concerts and or shows have you seen at the Sphere? I've been there once.
You know, it's funny. I haven't been there yet, and I drive by it probably 5 days a week. I've never been inside, so I have to get in there soon. What do you think of it? Was it awesome?
It's pretty awesome. I saw U2 there, and I will tell you this, and I'm sure people have told you this. I mean, I'm not going to tell you anything you don't know about the Sphere if you live out there, but somebody had given me the advice to actually buy tickets higher up, and it like in the higher level, like the 400 level, and it is true because the entire interior of it, the ceiling and everything is the screen, right? So instead of looking up the whole time, you're kind of just surrounded by it. The thing that amazed me the most, and I'm sure you've heard this, the sound was incredible. I mean, I've never been in a venue that had where the sound was that dialed in. For a live concert, it was truly incredible. It was expensive, but it was worth it for sure.
Yeah, we're all about venues. I think we have like 9 or 10 that hold at least 10,000. I think we have another NBA. Well, we don't have an NBA team yet, but there's a proposed NBA arena on the way. So Vegas is on the uptick, pretty incredible with the venues. But I heard the Sphere is awesome.
Okay, lastly, do or don't like Formula One being in Las Vegas? I've heard mixed reviews from the natives.
I'm fine with it. It makes traffic and getting around Vegas around the Strip hellish, but it's another good brand event for Vegas. I know it's maybe not the fan response you want. I haven't been to the event yet, but I think it's great for Vegas. It does inconvenience us for a good month and a half.
The traffic is one more reason to sell your friends on just hanging out in your local spots, right?
I think exactly. Let's get the hell out of here.
Steve, I appreciate it, man. It was good talking to you and appreciate the insight on Barry Odom. Have fun out there in Vegas, all right?
Thanks, guys.
All right, Steve Coffield from ESPN Las Vegas. I do love Las Vegas. And, you know, the first time that I ever went to Las Vegas, I was probably in my early to mid-20s. True story. I was moving, and when I was moving, I was just moving here in Indy from one place to the next. And when I was moving, I found, and it's funny that I'd forgotten about it, I had a voucher from when I had voluntarily gotten off of a plane for an airline, and they gave me a voucher, and I just thought it was like a lifetime voucher. Well, as I was moving, it was on the dresser, and so I looked at it and realized that it was expiring, and it expired in like 3 weeks from when I found the voucher. And I'm like, oh my gosh, like where can I go and I had no money. I've never been to Las Vegas. I'm just going to go to Las Vegas. So I used the voucher for a free flight to Vegas, stayed at the Holiday Inn Boardwalk on the Strip, which is literally a Holiday Inn motel on the Strip, but I was in whatever. So I'm walking around by myself, and the first night that I'm there, I meet some dude who was there for a work convention from Iceland, and he's like, I've never been here either. So me and this Icelandic dude just like went around and walked to all the casinos and walked the Strip and tried to learn Vegas, you know, whatever else, and soak it all in. And I kind of was like, yeah, it's okay. But now that I've been able to go and experience some of the shows and the entertainment aspect of it, I'm not a huge gambler. But the entertainment aspect of the shows and all that, and just the weather in general is what makes it so great. I mean, when you're out there, unless it's July and it's 115, but when the sun's setting on the desert and all that, I mean, it's pretty cool. And then obviously, I've been out there from a racing standpoint for work several times. The last race that I was there, not necessarily one that was a positive experience, but nonetheless, pretty cool place for sure. All right, back into what we were talking about earlier, and that is what in the world happened last night against Charlotte. It's interesting because this week, and I feel like it's a week later than a year ago. I could be wrong in that, but this is when you get into that week where, and a year ago, we were so caught up in the fact that the Pacers were a big part of it that I think we kind of lost sight of the in-season tournament, the way that it made the schedule kind of wonky. And so, in that regard, the gaps in games, because the Pacers were playing, well into Vegas, and then you look at the schedule and you're like, wait a minute, nobody's playing this week. Oh, that's right, because you're getting, further and, more into that in-season tournament. So Pacers off until, I believe, Corbin, it's Friday, correct? They got Philly?
That is right. They got Philly on Friday.
And so they get some time off. And I guess it's just time to kind of reset things. Several people have asked me, should the Pacers make a trade? I don't think that's the case, because I really, really, really believe this. I watch it. I mean, I'm not there like in the locker room, and maybe those that are around it closer than I would disagree with me on this, but I really do believe this. I don't think they have chemistry problems or issue. I just don't. I don't think that they have a bad group in any sort of thing like that. I don't even necessarily think that they have guys that can't play well together. I just think they have to figure out what it is that they're wanting to play. And, again, a big part of that is Halliburton healthy? I mean, is the back that detrimental? Detrimental meaning, I mean, is he held back that much? I don't know. I don't know the answer to that. But they got a couple days here to try to figure it out. But, man, I mean, that's a bad loss. Maybe Charlotte's just a bad matchup for them. Last year I thought they were really good, but Orlando was just a bad matchup for them. Maybe Charlotte's just a bad matchup for them. But we'll talk about it, and I'm sure John will talk about it plenty, upcoming, over the course of the week. I think it'll be a big topic of discussion. And certainly once, and it really is going to ramp up, that focal point, that attention, it's really going to, I think, escalate. For example, if the Colts lose to Denver. And I'm not saying they will. But the reality is that the Colts, this is a playoff game for them against Denver, because if they lose that game, it's going to be really tough, because not only do you lose ground to Denver, who does have a tough remaining schedule, but you lose a tiebreaker to them. And even though the Colts have a tiebreaker over this team that I'm about to mention at the moment, Miami is moving quickly. I mean, objects in mirror might be closer than they appear. That's kind of what Miami feels like at this point. And now that Tua is back, they're starting to pick it up a little bit here. But Miami also has their schedule remaining. They got San Francisco, kind of a question mark there. They do have Houston this weekend in Houston, and that's a big one. If Miami gets that game, then it's kind of Katie bar the door with the Dolphins, because, they got the Jets, and then they have, I can't remember the other game they play, but it's very winnable. San Francisco is an interesting one, because that's one that you still feel like is a big challenge. But, I mean, the Niners are kind of like the Bengals. They're totally opposite of, you still think that they're formidable, and you're like, I don't know. But the reality is that I think a lot of the attention about the Pacers, a lot of the focus, a lot of the scrutiny of them kind of gets put on hold until the Colts season is over with, quite frankly. And last year was the exception because of that in-season tournament. And the Colts also were, Richardson was out and you had Minshew, and they were interesting for sure, but it wasn't like now where people are really trying to figure out who they are. And if the Colts lose to Denver, I realize their season is not over, but it certainly then becomes a challenge, right? Definitely becomes a challenge at that point for them. And that's when I think we really will start looking at and turning the attention towards what exactly is going on. Because Brandon Miller is one guy for Charlotte. That's the perfect kind of player that the Pacers need. The perfect kind of player they need is that guy that's a wing defender that can shoot. I mean, say what you want about him. I like him. And I know that he had some controversy at Alabama, even though he was cleared of it, and people were hesitant about him. But good player. And good player on a roster and a franchise that you don't, you look at it and you're like, I mean, really? The Hornets, okay? Maybe it's just a bad matchup, but I don't think it is. I think the Pacers got to figure some stuff out. Speaking of figuring stuff out, Indiana will be doing that tonight. We'll be talking about it tomorrow. They take on Minnesota tonight, 9 o'clock. Is it 9 o'clock tip or 8 o'clock tip? Either way, Minnesota's another one that kind of like Indiana, you're not sure exactly what you're getting. I think from Indiana's standpoint, you want to get off to a good start in the Big Ten. Obviously, that goes without saying, but I think they've still got to kind of show that they've got something because there's a lot of question marks about them. I mean, are they a guard-oriented team? Are they a wing-oriented team? Is Mackenzie Mbako a 15-point per game guy or a 4-for-9 per night guy? Did you see the time, Corbin, by chance?
Yeah, it's 6:30 tonight.
That's a pregame at 6:30?
6:30 tip.
Really?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I don't know why.
That's what the schedule shows.
I don't know. I was thinking later than that. But either way, Indiana, Minnesota tonight, which we'll talk about. But I want to see from the Hoosiers, kind of what Don Fischer was talking about in the fact that I think it's important for them, notably, to get off to a good start. And by good start, I mean more than anything else, an energetic start. An energetic start because they just have been, to this point, they get out of the box and they look sluggish, quite frankly, and then they got to kind of play their way into games from there. But we'll see what happens tonight. J&V has walked in.
Who are you talking about?
Bottle of water. IU.
Oh, IU?
Yeah.
Yeah, Minnesota's not any good.
They're not, I know. But Minnesota's trying. But that's the thing, John. It's like Indiana feels like it's just still trying to figure out who they are too. You know what I mean?
No question. I don't think. Who have they been? Have they ever known who they are? Non-jump shooting teams in the past. Trace Jackson Davis carried teams in the past.
I mean, and then they have a guy in, you hear these people with Mackenzie Mbaka, oh, man, in practice, his shot doesn't even hit the net. And it's like, well,
yeah,
just depends from game to game which one you're getting, right?
Yep.
You want to watch again today. I like that.
Yeah, well, I did something at 59 for the premier weight loss people today on that Indy style.
And you wanted to make sure you knew what time it was?
So awkward because I have zero style. And I was on a show called Indy Style. Hey, September the 7th, 1991. Do you remember that day when IU played Notre Dame last?
I remember it mostly because it was 4 days after my birthday. I do, and I was thinking it was more recently than that, to be honest with you. For whatever reason, I was thinking that Indiana played Notre Dame when Matt LaVecchio was quarterback, but I know that it was simply that he transferred from Notre Dame.
It was. I remember it for this reason. It was Dickenberg and Bill Walsh. NBC just started their package in covering Notre Dame football in 1991. And the former Hall of Fame coach, no longer with us, Bill Walsh, kept referencing IU's defensive and offensive lines as smallish. I bet he did that 5 times. Smallish.
That would have been Trent Green, Von Dunbar era, right?
Yep. Thomas Lewis, Scott McGowan.
Was a stud, man. Thomas Lewis, remember, he came out early and was drafted really high by the Giants. That was kind of the peak for him. McGowan out of Ben Davis, good player.
Mose Richardson, M-O-S-E Richardson, secondary.
Yeah.
And
was Dumas still there? Dumas would have been gone by then, right?
Yeah, I think so. Damon Watts was there.
Yeah, Damon Watts is a good player. They had some good players, man.
They had some really good players. I think they had did they have Sean Harper? Was he a first-round pick, an offensive lineman? Later on, maybe not that particular year. Thomas Lewis was a first-round pick the next year. I think.
He was like the top 10
94,
pick,
I think it was for Thomas Lewis. But Von Dunbar, Brett Law, and then Rick Meyer and Demetrius Dubose had trouble because they were underage drinking before.
But Notre Dame won the game, right?
Yeah, 49-27. Bless you.
Thank you. So you're going to relive that game and more
we'll talk about some stuff today. I'm going to rip the Pacers because that half-ass effort deserves to be ripped. And that's what it was. There was so much lack of effort yesterday. That was an embarrassing display. It was.
All right, John's up next. He will be with you until 6, and then we will be back with you at noon tomorrow. Thank you for listening to Query & Company.